Welcome, folks. I'm happy to have a chance to spend some time talking about what we do with the engine. And I thought today I'd start with just a minute about myself. And my name is Reed Sturtevant. I'm one of the general partners at the engine. My original MIT connection is I came up to MIT 50 years ago this fall as a 16-year-old undergrad. I thought I'd graduate in mechanical engineering, but one thing led to another, and I never finished. I went into software engineering back before the personal computer, went through a number of companies during the personal computer period and the early days of the web. When I was at a small company in the 80s, developed a presentation graphics package. Was the author of something called Freelance Graphics that some of you may remember from that era. Super fun. We built it from zero to $100 million a year in revenue over the course of 6 years. The next part of my career I spent in incubators and accelerators, a company called Idealab in California, where we built multiple projects at the same time. And then about 10 years ago, I started investing in the Boston area with my colleague, Katie Ray. We've invested into probably 150, 175 companies over the last 10 years, and leading to my work here at the engine. So I thought I'd give the background for those that aren't familiar. MIT put the engine into business coming up on 6 years ago. So the president of MIT at the time, Raphael Reif, felt that there was a gap and friction in the path of commercialization of technologies coming out of research. The question was, was it MIT's part of MIT's mission to create essentially what's a market intervention? Over the course of a couple of years, 5 working groups, the decision was made, yes, let's create a firm and find someone to run it. So that the engine was put into business by MIT, given the mission of helping tough tech companies reach commercial success. So there are 3 parts of what we do. We have a fund, we have infrastructure, specialized infrastructure, and then we have a network of relationships. When we say tough tech, we believe that the most urgent global problems are also huge opportunities for investment. We believe that commercial success is one mechanism for reaching impact at scale. And we're working with founders that are on a mission to make the world a better place in some way or other. As an update, a year ago, our companies had about 1,000 employees, companies that we'd invested into. Since then, we've invested into another 8 companies. A couple of companies have gone out of business. The companies in total now number more than 1,700 employees. And so it's been a really fun journey. We've helped a lot of founders from very, very early days. I'll show you, I have in the presentation, I have pages for a number of the more recent companies and a number of the companies that we invested in at the very beginning to give you a flavor for the types of teams and the types of projects that they're. The engine as an investment firm doesn't have what you might call a thematic approach in theses that we're investing into. We're relatively opportunistic. If you look in hindsight, the companies that we've invested into tend to fall into 3 categories: climate change, a lot of energy companies, production, storage, transmission, also resource efficiency and decarbonization of industrial processes like cement, steel. We also invest in quite a few companies working on human health, cell therapies, manufacturing techniques, some in food and agriculture as well. And then we have somewhat of a catch-all bucket, which is advanced systems and infrastructure, a few semiconductor companies, transportation companies, supply chain and logistics, and a few advanced manufacturing in that category as well. We very much consider ourselves people first. So you'll see in a lot of what we talk about and how we make decisions, we're not the smartest people in the world. We don't know what the important problems are or what the solutions to those problems are. We're just looking for people who are on that mission. And we are very, very core part of our decision making is who are the full-time founders and why are they connected to the outcome that they're out to achieve? Because startups are so hard. So especially the types of companies that we work with take a lot of time, have a lot of ups and downs, and there has to be some authentic connection, we believe, between the founders and what they're working on. We have a tendency to bias towards technical founders who have a strong shot at remaining the leaders of their company. So we have to believe that they can continue to grow and learn and become good leaders. So when we make a decision to invest in a company, we really are considering a few simple things. As I mentioned, the team itself, when they succeed at scale, what is the positive impact on the world? And then at its core, is there a unique, differentiated breakthrough, research or engineering? And those things are important to us. Behind all of this, to remain in business and continue to support these kinds of companies, we have to make a return for our investors. So we have to believe that these companies could grow into very, very large businesses. Along with the funds, we're building a set of relationships. So we do a lot of work with corporations. We do a lot of work with different government bodies, and that's an ongoing set of activities. We run a 2-day annual conference that brings together a lot of founders, investors, corporations, policymakers. We have a series of smaller events that we run on an ongoing basis. Anyone that wants to be invited to these things, there's a way to sign up for our mailing list on our Engine website, engine.xyz. So please join in. The third component of what we do is infrastructure. So we run a set of specialized co-working spaces in the Boston area. They tend to be a mixture of lab space and office space. On the lab space, many of our companies that we work with are interdisciplinary. So we house a mixture of biosafety level 2 labs, chemistry labs with benches and fume hoods, different types of machine shops, prototyping facilities, up to light assembly and fabrication and electronics and characterization equipment as well. So if you're a small, young company without a lot of resources, building out your own lab can be a time-consuming and expensive proposition. And having access to shared equipment where it makes sense is also quite a accelerant, if you will, to progress. Our newest facility opened this fall. We're in an old Polaroid factory at 750 Main Street, right between Kendall Central and MIT, just a few minutes walk to core campus. And this facility has room for up to perhaps 1,000 people. We already have about close to 700 people working here. They're not all our own portfolio companies. They are companies that have similar needs and requirements. So it's a co-working facility. You pay by the month for desks, benches, lab access, shop access as well. And on the first floor, we have a big event space. So we run our events, and also open to others to host at our location. We opened in September formally, and we've already had more than 5,000 people come through the facility to the events themselves. Back to the investment side, where our CEO, Katie Ray, runs both the co-working side of the operation and is managing director of our core fund. We have a set of 4 general partners. On the mechanics of the engine as an investor, we typically invest at the seed stage. We are happy to write a check anywhere from under $1 million to maybe $4 or $5 million. We typically take board seats. We often have co-investors with us at that stage from the very beginning. We are very Boston-centric. So out of the roughly 45 companies that we've invested into, we only 5 of them are outside of Boston, 1 in Chicago, 2 in Houston, and 2 in the Bay Area. So we have a lot of our infrastructure obviously is geographically situated, so and Boston is such a fabulous source of breakthrough research and engineering that we have plenty of things to look at here. The funds have about $675 million under management. MIT is an anchor investor in the 2 main funds. Harvard came in as an investor in the second fund. University of California system is also in both funds. And the remainder of the investors are typically large families. The funds have a typical venture structure. We as general partners make the investment decisions. We invest into many companies out of MIT, but we're not attached entirely to MIT research. We invest in a lot of Harvard companies, some out of industry as well. We have a broad staff. About half of Engine employees are working on the fund side, half of them are on the facilities and infrastructure side. And we are always looking for associates and entrepreneurs in residence and advisors. We sort of have a circle of people in our orbit, if you will, as we help these companies make progress. So I'm happy to pause here before jumping into some of the companies. If we have any questions, you can, let's see how it's the easiest way to do this, Hara.
So people can type the questions in the chat, or they can unmute themselves and ask. Depends on what you would prefer.
Sure. Why don't you, if you want to ask a question, if you just type it into chat, and then perhaps we can call on people, and then you can, if you'd like to unmute yourself, that would be fine as well.
Hi, Reid. This is Anand. I work for Microsoft and also MIT LM, graduated in 2007. My question is that how somebody like me who wants to engage with Engine, what is the best way to get engaged? In more like a personal capacity, I'm sure when I'm working for Microsoft, I will bring Microsoft resources. I will appreciate your response. And I think you also spent some time at Microsoft.
Yes, yeah. I did.
Thank you.
That's a great question. I think the easiest way to engage, I mean, if you're looking for a role at the Engine, we have job postings at the Engine, as well as hundreds and hundreds at portfolio companies, accessible through our main Engine website. We have a general information mailbox, and most of our staff are easy to find on LinkedIn. So depending on whether you're interested in coming to events, or getting to know individual portfolio companies, or looking for a full-time or part-time role, you can reach out to our general info email address as well.
Okay. Yeah, primarily what I was looking, not a full-time job, but more understand what is happening, what type of companies are coming, maybe as a advisor or maybe a angel investor. I'm not sure if that is something is open for individual folks to invest. So that capacity I'm looking, not a job or anything like that.
It's we do have a mailing list that we announce events on, and that's another way to get connected into the flow of activity. Direct investment into different funding rounds, that really is managed by the individual company, so it's a little bit more opaque, if you will. There's no general announcement for various legal reasons in the US, the companies can't do sort of general solicitation, as they call it. But thank you for asking. And then Diego, I see in the chat, has the question about how startups approach the engine. And that you can either reach out to one of our associates, and they're all listed on the website, or you can there is a general inbound form as well to reach out, and our associates look through that constantly and can help you understand if what you're working on is a fit for what the engine invests in. And then there's, on the investment flow, there's a whole process with quick initial meetings and perhaps sharing information, having us develop a relationship and more questions. It's a very, we meet with, I would guess the most recent data, over 200 companies for every investment we make. So it's a very kind of complicated, not super, hopefully not super, hopefully easy to understand process, but it's very, it's where the engine has a very specific lane that we stay in when we're trying to invest. So Lou.
Hi, Reed. Good to see you again. My question has to do with the selection method you described is, I think very interesting, team focused. Just curious if, like, over time, as you gain more experience, if you imagine that model might change to, the other aspects you talked about was selecting good problems and, maybe a technical solution. Just curious how you think about that, because it seems like a common problem, not only in the investor space, but also in from an technology licensing office perspective as well, that we have this prioritization and selection challenge as a group.
That's a great question. So there's sort of two parts, I guess. One is how do we try to make the right choices and then provide the right support to increase chances of success for a company that we're working with. And then the second part is, how has that changed over the last, as from the origin of the engine 5.5 years ago to now? So the way it's changed is we're getting the complexity of the mix of companies that we work with obviously grows over time. Young companies that are maturing rapidly with luck, and then a broader and broader mix of industries and types of solutions. So and it's a question of how do we scale our efforts to keep up with that mix. So we definitely have worked on more programmatic, instead of just one-to-one work with our staff and the companies, how can we do one-to-many or even many-to-many where the community kind of helps each other learn and make progress. So as an example, we have internally been developing a series of facilitations, exercises, workshops, and then we have two interesting things that we're trying to help, one called Blueprint and one called Whiteboard. So I'll describe those briefly. And they're both described, I believe, on our website. Blueprint is a program that we started a few years ago, very lightweight, 5 consecutive Fridays. We run it twice a year, and it's intended for PhDs and postdocs who are contemplating commercializing their research. And it's a set of talks and exercises and even homework assignments to help present what we've learned, things that are different when you're working on a business rather than in academia, and trying to prepare a mindset to understand the differences between the two environments. And it's intended for people who are teams of people, 2 or 3 folks usually, who are not finished with their research or their education, but sort of starting to think ahead about whether they want to do this as a startup, what they would have to understand and commit to if they did take that path, we've had perhaps 500 people go through it over the last 2.5 years. So that's been really interesting to develop and continue to develop that. The other thing we do is called Whiteboard, which is a shorter form of sessions for typically faculty who are early in career. And likewise, if you're a PI or professor and you're going to start a company, it's not going to be a full-time thing. You're not going to quit your job typically. So that is a slightly different framing, and we bring in professors who have done multiple companies. How did they think about when was the right time to start a company? How do you find a founding team? Can how do you associate your lab with the company, whether you're, and that's open to people, not just MIT, but we have folks from other universities who come through those types of sessions as well. So those are examples where we're like, oh, it helps to kind of help people have a grounding about what they're going to be up for when they start a company. So how do we help prepare folks and help them make their own decision about, is this a path you want to step into? We also have realized that these kind of companies, and you see it when I describe some of the origin and the projects that people are working on. The path of entrepreneurship is not a typical Silicon Valley lean startup, do a minimum viable product and continue to pivot until you get product market fit, then experiment with different types of customer acquisition and go to market techniques until you find the one that really works. It's very different. The product market fit question is for fusion powered electricity. If you had clean, cheap, universally available electricity, is there a market for it? There's no question of product market fit. There's a whole lot of other questions. So understanding the different types of companies and types of not playbook is maybe makes it sound too disciplined, but the sets of problems and risks that you have to retire in different types of companies when it's a very science and engineering core, we're getting a little bit better every year at trying to sort of help these teams kind of understand what the hard parts are ahead of them. Okay, Shauna, I see your question about DEI. That's a great question. We're not doing as we have it always in mind. We can always do better. The gender balance, it has been easier for us because we're a women-led organization, and some things just happen naturally. But the ethnic and other aspects of diversity we have a harder time with. If you look at the portfolio, it's pretty interesting. We have I think 40% of the 45-ish companies that we've invested in have at least one woman founder, and then the underrepresented founders. It's been hard for us on that, to be honest. Apart from white and Southeast Asian, it's hard to get a lot of for us to really get the
I'm happy to talk with you about it. I'm an MIT alum, former MIT staff member, also used to run the MIT's office, things like that. And I think it's networks matter. And as a person who sits in intersectionality of like women and Black is, when you dissect them, we don't show up. So would love to chat or give feedback and thoughts around that, because I'm also connected with a lot of Black women founders and underrepresented women founders. So networks matter. I'm really happy, one, that you shared your team. I do appreciate seeing a lot of women who are on the team. And I'm sure even seeing the companies you're investing in, but there's still like a body of work that could be done. And I actually don't think it's that hard, particularly for MIT, because we've historically done a lot of work in specifically supporting like from high school up these groups, but sometimes I don't know if we always connect them over time. because there's a large talent pool there historically of alum and extended people who did MIT programs in high school that are now founders around the world. So happy to follow up with you and connect with you on that.
Yeah, I would love to take you up on that. And for you and everybody else here, let me put my email address in the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Emma, I agree with you about MIT. It's yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I just didn't know can you clarify the definition of tough tech? Like, what do you specifically mean by tough tech?
Yeah, we chose that phrase because it had been used by Raphael Reif in one of his early interviews about the concept of what became the engine. And we just liked that it's a little bit ambiguous, and tough meaning in the meaning it's hard, but it's also durable. So we definitely are looking for things that are based on some real breakthrough in science or engineering, and that if implemented at scale, solve real problems and make the world a better place. And that it's purposely loose because we don't want to close the door to any founder who knows better than us and sees a problem more clearly than us or a solution more clearly than us. So definitely it's intentionally broad. We do look at it because the engine is organized as a public benefit corporation. It's a class of charter in Delaware for corporations that have a mission statement, as well as increased shareholder value as a responsibility of a board of directors. So we have to, every 2 years, if you're a public benefit corporation, you have to publish, it could be a 2-page thing, but we do much deeper dive, a report, an impact report. So we just released one, I think a month ago, 6 weeks ago. So somewhere linked on our website is a 2-year retrospective of how we think we did in terms of impact against our mission statement. So that's also something that gives you kind of a deep dive into some of the activities of the companies.
Thank you.
Yeah. Robert, I see a question about, this is a good question because Raphael Reif, his belief was there's a gap in terms of funding and other types of support that could accelerate progress of these kinds of companies. And we definitely feel 5.5 years in, there is a gap at the early days, the seed stage, because it's been very easy for us to find important companies that other investors were not set up to invest in. So the engine and that those companies needed access to facilities that were not available unless they spent millions of dollars to build them out themselves, which resources that they wouldn't have in hand at the early days. There's a second gap which comes at scale, and that is still to be answered. So, for instance, in the energy field, getting project finance to build a power plant relies on the fact that these types of facilities are well understood, uptime, lifetime, and it can be financed against well understood offtake agreements but what if you are the world's first functioning fusion powered electricity plant? How do you get first of a kind project finance for untested, unknown technologies? That's still, it feels like in the field of climate that there's a lot of capital coming around these problems, but it's not, we haven't answered all the questions. But your question, is there a gap? We feel there definitely has been. Okay, thank you for the questions. I'll come back for more. So let me take some time to go through some of the recent companies, and then these case they're not studies, but stories of these companies will help anchor what the engine does. So these are arranged in reverse chronological order. So Atlantic Quantum Computing, is our most recent investment that we've closed. Actually, that we've announced that we've closed, so a couple since then. But it's a hardware company out of MIT, Will Oliver's Quantum Systems Lab. The goal of the company is they have a new architecture for quantum computers, a different approach to the actual qubit at the heart of it, a different approach to the control system that puts data into and gets data out of the qubits. The team has worked together in Will's lab, very young. When we decided to invest, the CEO, Bharat on the left, Bharat Kanan, he had not completed his, he had not defended his dissertation yet. So very, very new, a lot of founders, 5 core founders, and then Professor Oliver in the blue shirt, and then a professor in Sweden also. There's a whole first wave of quantum computing companies, heavily financed, inside big companies like IBM, also startups. This team feels that those companies are going for number of qubits before they work on quality of qubits, and this team wants to take the other approach. They go for quality first and number second, because there's a bunch of research that shows that even in the near term, with relatively small numbers of qubits, that there could be some practical solutions at hand, but you have to have high quality, low error rates, and long coherence times, as they say about the qubits themselves. One thing about the engine as an investor, most US venture funds have up to a 10-year fund life, where your money, your commitment is to wait that long if necessary for the return. Ours can be up to an 18-year fund life, which gives us the ability to invest in things that have a longer timeline, but of course they have to make up for the longer time, have to be a much bigger business. So that's one of the things that we did with the engine to let us tackle things like quantum computing. Mantle, also out of MIT, it's with Harvard as well. They're working on carbon capture from point sources. So they have a science that is a high temperature liquid process, which absorbs carbon dioxide, let's say from a power plant or a flue in an industrial furnace, absorbs carbon dioxide at one temperature, and at a different temperature releases it. So it's a liquid, high temperature liquid that would circulate between 2 zones of temperature and pull carbon dioxide out at one point and release it at another point. Because it's liquid, their hope, or the engineering expectation, is that it's got a longer lifetime and doesn't degrade as quickly. So it could be more economically more efficient way to scrub carbon dioxide out of industrial processes. Super early, proven on the bench scale, but now they have to do the engineering work, not only the engineering work to scale it up, but they have to figure out which industries and what markets would be most accepting of this technology. So again, it's 3 founders, very, very early. The engine is happy to support things that have a lot of engineering risk and a lot of timeline risk, and also Cam Halliday in the center is the CEO, but he's also was part of the research team that did the science. So we're happy to support a technical founder who will remain the leader of the company as long as it makes sense to him. And that's one of the things that the engine when we say we're people-centric, that's one of the things that we say that we do. Foundation Alloy, this is also out of MIT, out of Chris Shu's lab. So Chris is second from the left. He's professor who started many companies. This is based on research work that his lab has done for designing novel alloys that would make metal parts using additive manufacturing and be able to have better performance around things like strength, so you could have lighter parts, things like corrosion resistance, physical properties that you couldn't get using existing alloys. So if any of you are in manufacturing, there's a high performance alloy called Inconel, and one of the things this team says is, hey, we've got a family of alloys that are better than Inconel for those types of requirements, which is a bold statement. This company they have a bunch ahead of them to figure out. So we invested again, very, very early stage. We invested without them committing to which families of alloys they would commercialize first, without them committing to which industries would be their first markets. Those are the kinds of things that they are still ahead of them, that they're working through right now. So again, we are early seed stage investors, by and large, not universally, but by and large. Cano's out of MIT. The founder, Floris Engelhardt, is working on single-stranded DNA as a way to do genetic edits for a variety of purposes, whether it's human health or biomanufacturing. It's a way to do multiple edits in a reliable, repeatable way. That again, very early. We don't invest typically into things that it would be a typical pharmaceutical life sciences investment, but we often are in the life sciences investments that we make. They're often platforms, advanced manufacturing techniques, advanced engineering techniques for biological processes. All right, Hyphy, this is a company that is actually out of industry. One of the founders came out of Lanzatech. One of the founders had run a natural gas plant at ExxonMobil. They decided they wanted to work on a sustainable food production. So they're based in Chicago. They are working on developing a high protein flour that will be grown from mycelium. So it's a fungal growth in large vats that they can upcycle as a growth media, sugary waste product from agriculture and industry, from the food industry. So the idea is there's a whole set of food manufacturing that creates this wastewater that has organic content, where the manufacturers actually have a cost to bear to process that wastewater. That can be used as a growth medium for mycelium, and then with a proprietary processing technique, they can create, their goal is to create protein-rich flour that can be used for all kinds of human food is their current target. When we met them, they were making the samples in a bench scale on their own, like literally gram scale samples. They quickly, a couple of months ago, they scaled up to, I think they're using 60-liter vats that had made their first kilogram of flour, and now they're scaling. They're in a progressive scale-up process, and planning how to build their factories essentially, and what's the logistics of sourcing the growth media, and then what's the who they would sell metric tons of high protein flour to. So they're in the middle of this sort of food production industry. Afore Bioscience. The founder is, let me see, hang on one second. Ashley Beckwith out of MIT. Her mission that she's given herself is to create forest products without deforestation. So imagine everything from lab-grown wood or cellulose pulp for paper and cardboard, to high-value oils and fragrances. So it's a combination. Her personal mission is avoiding deforestation, which is bad for climate, but also bad for conservation. There are certain species that are scarce and harvested. They're harvested in the wild because of the ingredients that can be pulled out of them. She's developing a set of cell culturing techniques that are not well understood for different types of plants and different plant structures. So it's a pretty ambitious goal, but one that really felt like it fit. And this is an example where we got involved at a very, very early stage, with the idea that if Ashley, the founder, can get enough proven out in the first year, then she'll get the type of investment behind her that's required for something this complex. Osmosis, also out of MIT, with some founders out of Stanford. It's a new family of membranes for gas separation, whether it's there and applications in things like you can transport hydrogen in natural gas pipelines, but how do you mix it? You only up to a certain concentration. And how do you separate it at the destination end from the methane? So those types of industrial processes that have applications in across different types of energy transition. And again, very early, the founder Francesco had been doing the research and characterized these membranes at a super small scale at the time that we invested. So it has quite a bit of engineering work, scale-up work, and market definition and choice. Amide, I'm on the board of this one. Professor Brad Pentaludi on the right, his lab at MIT had developed the machine behind him, which is built by Amide, is it assembles amino acids into proteins, and it can do chemical synthesis of proteins, including proteins that would be hard to engineer out of living cells, non-natural amino acids, mirror images, and they have a team of AI and ML developers who are working on the prediction of structure, but also of function of a sequence that is then turns into a protein that folds. And then because they have this printer, in a matter of hours, they can manufacture the protein. They can then do assays to test, does it have the solubility we predicted? Does it have the stability if you were going to use it as an oral drug, that we predicted? Does it have the binding characteristics that we predicted? And feed that data back in. So that's a very difficult thing for a lot of these AI-based systems, is to test their predictions rapidly and use it to train the models and improve them. So that's the goal of Amide, is to do that for protein discovery and with computation, but then the ability to manufacture it and the ability to do specialized structures that you couldn't get a cell to express. So a lot of therapeutic proteins are grown in cells, but there are a lot that could never be, that they have access to as well. Axoft, very early team when we met them, two founders out of Harvard, They are working on a implant that's a brain-computer interface for monitoring and eventually stimulating neurons. The approach that they're taking, it's incredibly soft. Its electrodes are printed onto an incredibly soft polymer that is much more compatible with the softness of the brain. So their science has shown that it doesn't degrade, and the brain doesn't kind of grow around it. So in a human patient with something like deep brain stimulation, for certain indications, you have to replace the probe on a regular basis. So these not only could last longer, but they're soft and can stretch. So in a situation, in a childhood disease where the brain is growing, you often have to replace the implant on a regular basis, but this could be longer periods because it can stretch with the growth of the brain. So it's also a photolithographic manufacturing process. So the idea is that they're working on their current generation has a few hundred electrodes. They're working on one with 1,000. They're working on one would have 4,000. So it can much more coverage of larger areas of the brain. Super early animal studies and a long road ahead of them, but a very a very ambitious goal. Pernick, this is what industry. So Jacob Gross on the left was at BASF. His goal is to develop families of low temperature catalysts for more economic chemical synthesis, particularly beginning with ammonia. Ammonia for the energy transition is likely to be used for transport of energy that, for instance, the country of Korea is moving to a hydrogen economy, imports almost all of its energy and expects to be importing it embodied in ammonia, and then split out to get the hydrogen back. So it's the production of ammonia, it could become a really central part of the energy economy over time. Sublime Systems. This is Professor Yetming Chang and the founder who was in his lab, Leah Ellis. She is building a company to do to help create carbon neutral cement. Carbon is one of the largest. Cement is one of the largest contributors of carbon in the atmosphere, and the idea they have is an electrochemical process that replaces the furnace-driven steps for creating an ingredient in cement. They're actually, we've invested with just her. It's a second company out of Yetming's lab that we've invested into. They have made very more rapid progress than they expected to. There's some really interesting regulatory issues that they were worried about in the US that have shifted quite quickly. The US had a composition-based set of standards for what the ingredients in cement that met certain standards for certain types of construction included byproducts of the fossil, these things called clinkers, which are the byproduct of the fossil furnace-driven production process, were required ingredients in the grades of cement that are used in construction. But since the company was started, the US is shifting over to performance-based standards. You have to show setting time and strength through testing, which Europe has always has in their construction standards for cement. So that means that the regulatory path to market in the US is suddenly much more open to their set of products than they expected. The company Sublime is hoping that they will not have a so-called green premium, that their ingredient will create cement that is the same price point as traditional means of production. We're finding that's an important thing for the climate companies, is that having to rely on a carbon tax or carbon credit to make up for a less economic solution is friction that a lot of these companies are trying to avoid. Emvolon out of MIT, Emmanuel Casares, who had worked in oil and gas, in the oil and gas industry for a while, and then went back for a PhD. And his co-founder, Leslie Bromberg, was, they had a novel insight that a mass-produced diesel engine block inside the cylinders reaches the temperature and pressure regimes that are often needed for different types of chemical synthesis. So their goal is to build these very small, where you put a catalyst inside a cylinder, you use plasma at certain points, and you do continuous or even rampable synthesis of compounds like methanol and ammonia in a modular, decentralized way. Bunch of different applications for it. They are first going after the reduction of flare gas from oil fields, natural gas that just burnt and vented in the atmosphere. They can build a device that will take that gas, turn it into liquid methanol, which then could be sold into the methanol supply chain. It's a really interesting, a very MIT type of work, because very creative, and it's a new type of manufacturing with different characteristics as modular and decentralized approach versus building enormous chemical plants that are centralized. Veer, this is an interesting one. It was the founder, one of the founders, Tim, came out of MIT, but they found technology that had been developed early on, I think even back in the 70s at Los Alamos National Labs. The goal is to develop a transmission line that can carry much more power than today's transmission lines by using liquid nitrogen and high temperature superconductors for the cabling. They are the goal is, and if you've read about trying to get hydropower from Canada across Maine and the other states on the way to Massachusetts or New York, expanding a corridor to put more power lines in place is near impossible in the US. So this technology would improve the grid by having higher power carrying capacity for existing narrow corridors. It also could have in different instantiations benefits for ground-based power transmission, which is to remediate some of the wildfire risk in the western states. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge business. The engineering work is pretty deep ahead of them to how do you build a system that they're using liquid nitrogen to cool this family of high temperature superconductors. That's been tried a number of times, but it's always been tried in a closed system, which is incredibly expensive to build and operate. They're using an evaporative system where you introduce a liquid nitrogen into an engineered cable, and then the cooling happens along a certain path, and then it's vented into the atmosphere. So it should be, their thinking is that it should be much simpler to construct and operate. If it works and they get the support they need in terms of access to capital, it can be an enormous business. Just imagine rewiring the grid in the US. It can be quite an enormous business. I see more questions. That's good. So I'll run through a couple more of these, and then come back to this routing company. We do invest in some software companies. This team, one of the founders, Alex Waller, was a PhD student in CSAIL, working with Daniela Roos, and they did some research on shared rides, an algorithmic approach to fitting more passengers into fewer vehicles without inordinately increasing wait time for each individual, or increasing ride time for each individual. So it's a family of algorithms that let them choose how long to run the optimization for, and know how much better it would get over what length of computation. So they could tune the telling which driver to pick up which passenger in what order and drop them off in what order. So they're up and running. They have municipalities. They sell to municipalities. So they have municipalities across the U.S. Running dozens of vehicles, and also in Europe. The make the world a better place is less congestion, less pollution, higher social equity. So workers who have extremely long commutes and rely on public transit, how do you improve the kind of last mile, if you will, from fixed route to where they have to go, to where they live or where they work. Celestial, this is one that's in the Bay Area. It's out of industry. The founders have decades of experience in the semiconductor industry. It started as a unique architecture for AI acceleration. Along the way, they invented what they call a photonic fabric that uses optical layers in a chip package to move data directly to where it will be used for computation. This optical data movement within a chip, as well as chip to chip, is really going to be helpful, as there are a number of bottlenecks as Moore's law kind of plateaus, that there are a number of bottlenecks in order to keep increasing the efficiency of compute and the energy usage of compute that has led to this whole explosion of different types of purpose-built compute architectures for different applications like AI. And then just the sheer movement of data across many compute storage assets is extremely energy intensive as data centers continue to scale up. So their photonic fabric architecture has a lot of promise. Building this scale of semiconductor company is quite a lift. And to be fair, Silicon Valley still is better for this kind of silicon. So the talent and the resources they need is really concentrated in that area. Quays, this one I love the origin story of. The professor came to visit us. I'll just tell a short story about Paul, who's the second from the left. And he was like, I spent most of my career trying to figure out how to make, Plasma Science Fusion Center, how to make materials that would not be harmed, would hold up better to plasmas. Plasmas are rough on materials, so the wall of a tokamak, how do you make a better wall? Finally, towards the end of my career, I was like, you know what, this is really hard. Why don't I try to figure out how to use, what could you do where you want plasma to destroy materials? And he pulled literally out of his jacket pocket, a piece of basalt, maybe about 20 centimeters thick, with a hole melted right through it. And he's like, careful, the edges are sharp. And he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use microwave energy to melt deep into the Earth's crust to reach superheated zones for unlimited geothermal energy anywhere you want. You could do it in the middle of a city, energy is needed in urban areas. And so we had an employee in the center, Carlos Araque, at the engine at the time, and he had to move because for family reasons, and he's like, you know what, why don't I go? Let me be the CEO of that company because I really want to solve that problem. So it's rare that we kind of can help assemble a team around a technology that the engine doesn't really know how to do that. But this was sort of an accident where the professor found us early in the engine days, and Carlos raised his hand. He had worked at Schlumberger, so he kind of had a network of relationships in that industry, and they had been able so far to raise enough capital. They're in Houston, so to do this iterative development. BioBot, many of you may have heard of BioBot. Mariana and Nusha, they came out of MIT. They it's a public health company, which is now, they help track by analyzing sewage wastewater. They help track things like COVID and monkeypox at a city scale. So they have, if you go to the MWRA, the Massachusetts Water Resources Association website, and you look at the charts of COVID, the amount of COVID viral load in the population of Boston, and the specific strains, that data is collected by this company, BioBot. So it's an accurate leading indicator of public health waves in a population, and I forget exactly how many days in advance, but the caseload tracks their data with a lag of, I think, maybe 5 or 7 days. So it's a monitoring system for public health in populations. And when we met them and invested, they small team, they had contracts to analyze at a neighborhood level opioid use and other substances of hazard. So they had an arrangement with the city of Springfield, Mass, where they'd measure in different manholes and be able to help the city target their public health resources in a more efficient way against the opioid crisis. When COVID hit, they immediately pivoted and offered their services to different municipalities. No exaggeration, they went from having 4 customers to having 400 customers in 4 weeks. So it was an incredible scramble, but they now are an essential part of the public health system in many cities across the country. C-Spire, so this one is, Camille is out of Northeastern University, and her professor Leila on the right she was studying materials that are materials that come from cephalopods, and realized that they could synthesize a new ingredient which that can be used to filter different UV and IR light wavelengths, and they could tune it. So that they are building an ingredient company every couple of decades. A new ingredient for things like skincare and sunscreen get developed, and those can turn into multi-billion-dollar businesses. But these new ingredients only come along every so often. So they believe that they've got one of these new ingredients. She was just accepted into the company was just accepted into the Sephora accelerator. They're going to launch a couple products that are doing formulation and data gathering around their new molecule. It doesn't, as a sunscreen ingredient, it doesn't disrupt the endocrine system. It's safe for sea life. And if you have dark skin, it doesn't have this chalky white kind of characteristic to it. So it doesn't, at first glance, it may not seem like an engine company to work on skin care, but behind it is a deeply technical achievement. sync computing, the founders were working at Lincoln Labs. So we do talk to Lincoln Lab and have a relationship with the extended MIT ecosystem. They had invented a new type of analog circuit for optimization, sort of computing, analog computing for optimization. We invested into the company. They've actually realized that by implementing a software-based emulation of their analog electronic circuit, they can get very, very good efficiency in solving the same problems that their analog circuit was intended to solve. And then they found that it has an application for reducing the cost and improving the efficiency of distributed applications. So data processing pipelines in cloud applications, there are software packages like Apache Spark that are used in data processing pipelines. They can optimize the allocation of different types of compute, network, and storage resources to more efficiently pack a computation around available resources. And their customers, they're working with large companies and saving their customers quite a bit on their cloud computing bills, upwards of 50% in some situations. So an interesting origin story, because they were hardware engineers who then realized that, oh, we can build a solution as a software company. Vaxis, they've recently gotten really great data from human trials. They have a painless patch which has microneedles. It embeds. In their case, they're using it for vaccine delivery. So the active ingredient is held in this silk protein. So you put it on your skin, wait 5 minutes, take it off, and then they can tune the release of the vaccine over the course of hours or days to get a better immune response. And it's also shelf stable. It doesn't need a cold chain. So you could imagine mailing this to every family in the country and having a flu COVID patch that is low skilled for delivery. They've just got some really interesting preliminary data back from a human trial, which is putting them in a really good point for the next phase. Boston Metal. This is an unusual. I mentioned that we most often invest like right at the earliest days. We met this company, came out of MIT. It has an electric direct electricity to smelt ore into metal. The ultimate goal is carbon neutral steel production. They had been up and running for maybe 6 years, funded by grants. So when they first went out to raise venture capital, they looked like a later stage company. They were, I think the first round they were raising was $25 or $30 million. So this team had a few years of development under their belt before the engine got involved. They're local, they're out in Woburn, and recruited a CEO today out of industry. He's worked in the metals and mining industry for most of his career. So a little bit of a different shape. Some of these teams take a different path. And then I think this may be the last one I've got, Commonwealth Fusion Systems. I put them in here because they were one of the first companies we invested into. They are working on fusion-powered electricity. Obviously, hugely ambitious project. They were negotiating with MIT. They were MIT employees, and they wanted to have a unique exception to the conflict of interest rules and create a kind of a hybrid organization where the private company would have employees, and then MIT would still, the private company would fund research at MIT that would be science related to making this whole business work. It was complicated negotiation, and they were still MIT employees. So the engine got involved and said, hey, why don't we write you a very small check? I think it might have been $250,000. And you can take 4 desks across the street, and we were in Central Square at the time. And then you'll be sort of arm's length having the conversation with MIT. fast way forward 5 years, their most recent venture round was $1.8 billion of investment. They have dozens of scientists who are MIT employees at the Plasma Science and Fusion Center. I believe they may be the largest, the private company that's the largest funder of research at MIT. You know, sort of it flips so much from being just for people who just quit their jobs to funding back into the Plasma Science and Fusion Center. The lab had lost its funding from the government because it all had gone to Europe for ITER. They have a site in Devens in Western Mass. They've built up, are in the middle of building up a research facility in a tokamak hall, and their plan is in a couple of years to build the first net positive thermal energy tokamak called Spark, and then by roughly 2030 to have come online with a power generating tokamak called ARC. So it's a hugely ambitious and mission, and a really really interesting progress in very little time. Okay, one more. Nabiha in the middle, and Marina on the left were two Harvard physics PhDs. Matthias is a experienced engineering entrepreneur who they met at a competition, I believe, and they are building an automated system to manufacture human tissues for therapeutic purposes. So imagine taking one of your cells, turning it back into a stem cell, and then differentiating it forward into cells for the back of the retina, different types of cells. And along that differentiation, using computer vision and lasers to say, oh, wait a second, that particular cell is not maturing properly. Let's destroy it with a laser. Let's move these cells around with laser tweezers to get them in the right position as a sheet of tissues. And having that all automated and happen in a lights out cassette. So you can imagine a data center where the machines are not doing computation, but are manufacturing human tissues for therapies. Very, very ambitious, very long road, but a great team, and they've managed to gather a lot of great people and resources to sort of forge ahead on their mission.